Well, hey guys, thanks for coming. And looks like we got a good crew again. Always really appreciate it. I thought we'd start off with a little breakout session like we usually do. Hey, Brandon, can you crank that out?
Yep, certainly. Let me just do some quick math here.
Okay.
So we'll get that going. Do you want to tell and just touch on it before we get going so
Yeah,
newbies
let's
know what
do
we're
that.
doing?
So the last few weeks, for those of you who are new, we kind of randomly break people out. We're trying to get people to know each other a little bit better. So it'll randomly break people out, into groups of two. And kind of we've been using this paradigm of red, yellow, green that Ray Foote helped us kind of identify. So the idea of like green, how, if things are going really well, yellow, if things are a little, unstable, and red, if it's something's critical. So let's break out and kind of meet and greet people for the first time. Hopefully it's random and we'll get to chat with folks we haven't chatted with before.
All right, here we go.
Well, good. Well, thanks. I'm glad we did that. I hope everybody had a good time with that. It's always great to kind of connect one-on-one and start the conversation that way. So I hope you guys had some good conversations to start off with. Hey, so I wanted to kind of just chat to a couple of things that have been on my mind. So I have this crazy journey next week. I actually had this crazy experience a couple weeks ago. I'm thinking about getting an adventure motorcycle, like a big BMW thing. And I was like, yeah, maybe I should write some friends and figure out, what kind of bike I should get. Cause I haven't ridden, I've ridden like 100 miles in my life. And so this buddy of mine, Tinker Hatfield, who's one of the guys at Nike, and he actually sent me back a note, texted me back a note and said, BMW GS F850, this one has 50 miles on it. It's in Bend, Oregon. It's yours. Come get it. And so I'm going to pop out there next week and we're going to ride back to Boulder. So kind of starting a crazy, a little adventure. I'm a little nervous since I haven't ridden that much, but I think, 1,400 miles, I'll be able to figure out how to ride after that. So all good. But I was thinking this morning a little bit about, the news. I don't know if you guys saw the news that 2.4 million people are unemployed. So it's up to 3.86. And a really disconcerting article for me was that one economist is estimating that maybe as much as 42% of those folks aren't going to be reemployed. So the question, that I've been thinking a lot about, and certainly dovetails into the question that we created for this week, is if there's all that surplus of talent, then how do we? It feels like incumbent on us to help redeploy those folks, right? Create a variable talent model that we all can talk about in the same way, and that's really easy. We decrease the friction. So that's kind of some thoughts I've had this morning, and kind of getting into things. I'd love to, Balaji, you kind of prompted me to, and you and I have had some conversations, but really the question was like, what are we going to do as a group, right? Not just have a great meeting every Thursday, which is always fun, but how can we really get some stuff going? So we created this question: what initiatives would you want to do that need others in the ecosystem to participate to solve a long identified issue in driving adoption of open talent? And then who would you like to collaborate with? I thought today we would just kind of kick off with Chris Stanton again, to give some context. And Jerry, if you can be on the whole call, I'd love for you to kind of maybe wrap things up today. Are you going to be able to be on the whole call?
Yep.
Okay, good. Yeah, go for it, Chris.
Thanks so much, John. When I saw the topic of ecosystems that came through this week, one of the things that struck me, and this may just be a product of having ADD and not being a great academic who is completely devoted to one topic narrowly, is that I've been reading an enormous amount of literature about the search for a COVID vaccine. And it probably doesn't surprise anyone in the US that sharing of medical data and sharing of any information across platforms or across institutions is basically impossible. And if you reflect on that from sort of an ecosystem perspective, where everyone is in their own silo, it essentially means that you have a bunch of competing teams who are working for a common goal, but aren't working together and aren't coordinating and aren't sharing any information about what's happening on the ground or about what their early signals are about what's working. And so I think if you kind of take a step back, one of the things that I think is a great benefit from thinking about things from an ecosystem perspective is the ability to solve some of these coordination issues or to break down silos. And, you know, I've talked to a couple of people who are on the call about their thinking around open innovation and open questions from sort of the pre-COVID era. And every time I heard that, it was like, you know, someone in my organization sort of has this siloed approach, and we kind of know that this is going to be beneficial for us, but we can't just break down these barriers. And the same thing is true sort of in the world of vaccine development and in the world of medical development, where we see the same barriers that prevent the establishment of an ecosystem that will probably, on aggregate, cause us an enormous amount of suffering because of the lack of data sharing and the lack of ability to bring an outside perspective in to evaluate some of these trials. And so I'm a little bit distracted this week because one of the other hats that I tend to wear is that of a statistician. And I've thought that people have been thinking about the clinical trial process wrong. And I've been trying to write a short paper to think about how to optimally design trials with Michael Kramer, who has been working on a project to quantify the impact of speeding up vaccine development. And as I was reflecting on that, I thought that one of the things that I've learned through this is one of the important lessons that comes up week over week in terms of breaking down some barriers in the open assembly types of world that everyone here is working towards. And so I'll just say that I commend everyone who has been working towards these areas to break down some of these barriers, because I think it's an enormous welfare loss to not be doing so. Now, John opened us up to say that there are important employment implications around some of these ecosystems questions, and I couldn't agree more. I think that anything that we can do that makes some of these friction points to use open practices easier will be enormously helpful for thinking about recovery prospects going forward in the future. But I also think that some of the practices that we all sort of know work around innovation, especially in an uncertain world, we should be thinking about for some of the important questions of our age around vaccine development or around medical innovation. So I see some chats coming in on this front, et cetera, and happy to connect with people who know more about sort of the vaccine development than this wannabe statistician. But
Yeah,
thanks, John. This is a great topic.
Great, Chris. Yeah, great. Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate that. Yeah, and Steve Rader just put up a really cool book that I love, Warren Berger, More Beautiful Question. We should get Warren on. He's a good friend, and I haven't talked to him in a bit, but it would be really great to talk to him about, how do you frame the right kind of questions and have a session on that for sure. So great. Well, thanks, Chris. Really appreciate that. Let's dig into the topic. Hey, Brian Pena, you were so thoughtful last call and thought maybe it would be great to get your perspective from MBO and what you're thinking about in the context of, how do we participate together to kind of, tackle this adoption issue, and then who would you like to coordinate or collaborate with on this?
I think Dean used a reference to being caught off guard, and I was definitely on that. But I think on the last call, I think that this is a unique time in how people are pursuing opportunities. And what we're doing as a company is we've created a lot of enablement tools that enable individuals to start their own business for themselves. And we're calling that, I forgot the name of the product platform, but we've really been focusing on collecting and harvesting profile information for people who may be interested in setting up their own personal enterprise. That's been a very successful message for us as a company. And I think that it's turned into a lot more of it has been counseling at the individual level. In terms of working together and how we can collaborate to do that, I think calls like this are really the best possible way. The one thing that is we need to think about is how do these great ideas become practical? Everybody on this call is obviously incredibly intelligent, and the brain power in this room is really humbling. But I think that the thought process about making the rubber hits the road and how you commercialize, and that's what we're really forced to talk about here. How do we commercialize some of these good ideas and work collaboratively? I know Dean and I have had a lot of conversations about doing things like that, and I think that there are certainly opportunities for us to work together by just simply continuing to engage in dialogue and share insight and information. And I'm certainly available if anybody's interested to talk more about some of the work we're doing with different state agencies around legitimizing independent work and how we're helping them manage the massive influx of people who are now in the independent economy.
Yeah, that's great, Brian. Thanks for mentioning that. I like that idea of empowering individuals to start their own businesses.
Yeah,
Hey,
we're really that's our mission. That's our the mission of MBO is to help people do the work they love the way they want to do it. That's our mission statement. So
I love that. Really kind of really lockstep with the idea of the passion economy and all
yeah,
that.
absolutely.
Hey, Nicole, I noticed you were on the call. I'm super psyched to have you here. I'd love to get your perspective. Nicole's from SAP and does a lot of the innovation stuff. And welcome to the call. And I don't know if you have any thoughts, if you're to answer the question or any questions you have for anybody.
Yeah, not this time, John. I think I'm interested in listening. I'm glad to be able to attend this meeting time. I have a regular meeting, so I feel lucky that this time I get to be here. From an SAP perspective, we own a business that coordinates talent called Fieldglass for sort of freelance talent. So we're interested in evaluating it from that perspective. But our part of the business looks at leveraging headcount that we don't have internally to do speculative work. So we work in emerging technology research, trying to figure out, we're not necessarily sure that we want to invest in this technology yet. We need to do kind of cutting edge side projects before we make that investment. And I think that will certainly continue. So that's our interest in this call. And I don't think that that's going to change in an unemployment space that might actually even pick up for us, where we want to be really tentative about adding full-time staff.
Great. Well, thanks. That's a great perspective. Really appreciate it. Glad you could make the call and offer some perspective. Hey, Duke, Stephen Duque, would love to have your comments. You and I had a great conversation the other day, and Duke's from Catalent. So any thoughts from your perspective? I know this is your first call, but would love to get your input on stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, John, and nice to meet all of you via Zoom. Very similar to Brian, we're making significant product investments and investing in the individual and empowering the individual to build their business as an independent consultant or expert slash kind of more white collar freelancer. And our product roadmap reflects just tools around enabling them to share what they do. We're also experimenting with different ways to just make the user experience more frictionless. And then we're also, tackling it from like a programmatic standpoint and legal standpoint to just try to bundle up some of the kind of traditional hurdles that many enterprises in particular experience as they try to kind of engage people on project-based work. And then on the flip side of the coin, is that we also have this software business that a core part of our messaging is to try to change people's minds, leaders' minds, to get them to shift from these more traditional notions of talent acquisition and retention to talent access, and reimagining what it means to be an employee. That these people may sit outside of their walls and may not carry a company badge, and we've seen a lot of market resonance with that that element of our messaging. But really excited to be to join and to learn from all of you and to share in the thinking.
Yeah, thanks, Duke. Really appreciate that. That's awesome. I know Sheila raised her hand. She would love to see you have some thoughts there, Sheila?
Yeah, it was back on Chris's topic of clinical trial data. So I can wait if we're, I don't want to take us off tangent.
But yeah, if you got a few thoughts, I'd love to kind of, and this is all about collaboration. So go for it.
Yeah, sure. So LifeSci Hub is an online resource marketplace for independent consultants in the clinical trials space. I myself have worked in clinical trials for the last 25 years. And there were two things I wanted to bring to the group in response to what Chris had said. Number one, the industry actually does have an initiative called Real World Evidence, real world data and real world evidence, which is the methodology that takes data out in the world and validates it to such a data quality level and an analysis, like you can really trust this analysis, almost on par with clinical trials. So it's a burgeoning, very new development, but just to let everybody know with respect to COVID-19 data and data silos, we actually have the methodology to analyze data way better than we are right now. And really the problem is those data silos, and breaking those data silos down. I think we as a group could take a very long time to discuss that. Yeah, and there was one other point that I wanted to make, but I forgot what it was. Real world evidence, and it'll come back to me, John.
Cool. Well, you should definitely connect directly with Chris and make sure that you guys are having a dialogue for sure.
Oh, I remembered. May I? Do I still have the talking pillow? One of the other things that's happening in this industry, and this is kind of circling back to open talent adoption, and thinking about clinical trials differently, what we have is an industry that is being called to innovate in a way that it never has been before. It's an extremely risk-averse industry. FDA, in response to COVID-19, has put out guidances, which are really the lifeblood of the industry, is FDA saying what you can do or what you cannot do. And they've opened the door. They've basically said they're open to almost any suggestion as to how to do things differently. And what's really fascinating sitting where I am right now is observing my industry sluggishly move towards innovation, and the fact that there's so much more to the barriers to innovation than I think we really understand. And I would be interested in hearing more about the barriers to open talent adoption. I mean, just because it exists doesn't mean anybody will actually embrace it. And if they're not embracing it, there's something more to the decision-making heuristics around open talent versus full-time employees that I think warrants further analysis and deep dive.
Yeah, that's great. And that's a really good point. I like that. I think there are a bunch of cultural issues that are even, it gets into even the identity work, right? I know Jerry's done a bunch of great identity work, and, some of these new things always threaten not just the organizational identity, but also the identity of the individual and how they see themselves in the world. Hey, Mark Barton, you always, have inspired me because, of all the great brand work you've done. And I always love to get your point of view on these kinds of bigger cultural issues, because you're such a good cultural thinker. Want to weigh in here?
You take me seriously with the hat on?
Yeah, I do, man. You're the pirate. I love it. You're the pirate of our group today. Anybody that wears a pirate hat gets to talk automatically.
Okay, good. Well, I'm really fascinated by, Sheila, your point there about the FDA saying, hey, we're wide open to break all the rules, come to us in a way that you've never come to us before, and that the industry is struggling to respond because it doesn't have that muscle. Right. I mean, that is really telling to me. I'm not sure what to do with it other than, immediately gives me a sort of opening, I think, for the broader conversation that this group is trying to have with the world to clients in general, big companies in general, which is your people actually don't know how to operate at speed when given permission and license to, and the clear case to act this way. And maybe the accelerant in the system for you is to bring in outside talent who's decided. I mean, think about the mindset of individual white collar workers who said, I've got something that is marketable just for me. I don't need to sit inside the safety and security of this large organization. I can hang a shingle and make a contribution. To bring some of those accelerants into these large corporates, including, the kind of companies and organizations that are working on vaccines, for example, and just give them that catalyst. I mean, that's a really great piece of framing. I forget who you were talking about. John is doing some work on story and identity, but when you're talking to scientists and engineers and the kind of people that are working in these large organizations, they understand that, I think, as a mental model. Oh, okay, so in order for the bread to rise, we need the yeast. Where do we get yeast? We're not used to putting yeast in, or not this much yeast, or not that kind of yeast. And the way that this group presents open source innovation as catalyst, just coming in just a little bit here as a way to get a foot into the door and create, get that bread to rise. I mean, the right person at the right time with the right information can have a massive amount of impact in all kinds of different places. And as a marketer and a brander, I'm always thinking about what's the story that's the unlock here. We've got the skills, we've got the mindset, the people, the know-how. We just need a story that unlocks it for those people. And maybe how we choose to frame that at this moment is as important as what the what is.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I love the idea of reframing stuff. Thanks. Hey, Kelly from Arrow, I saw you on the screen, and you guys have done some amazing work with Freelancer. Do you want to take a moment to lean into the question? Are you still on the call? No, maybe. I just thought I saw you on there. So apologies if you're not on. If you just ping me and we'll talk. Hey, Paul. You always have a lot of stuff to say and a good perspective on this. Anything from your perspective on, ways we collaborate together and who would you like to collaborate with more, and what do you see, how do we drive this together, this adoption issue?
I have a lot to say. No, so I think one of the projects I'd like to put out to this group, I would like to collaborate with everyone. So there's not an individual. I've been a fan of yours, John, and the work that you do with Open Assembly and in the crazy bunch of pirates and people that work in glacier environments and wear pirate hats. And one of the things that I'm going to be doing over the next 4 months is pulling together a definitive guide for enterprise organizations as they adopt, call it open innovation or on-demand talent. And we're going to be publishing that on staffing. What I'd like to do is I'd like to open source the creation of that. I've got an editor and all of that. I'd like to open source the creation of that to everyone on this call, and then, produce it. And I think it's a way for this group to contribute and get all the thoughts written down and edited in a good way. I've got designers and funding to create that for staffing. And so I leave it to you, John, but I'd like to propose that as a project we can do over the next 4 months. And it's particularly targeted towards enterprise companies that are trying to figure out progressive staffing. I think we talked about the unemployment and all of these different things. And I believe that companies are going to start feeling more of a social responsibility as they look at engaging talent and looking in a different way. And so my hope is, as they start those programs, we provide a very tactical and operational guide on what the various personas, whether it's a procurement manager, an HR manager, an executive, can do to start embracing, I think, what we all believe is necessary for a lot of different reasons. And so I'd like to put that project on the board, and then I will operationalize it over the next couple of weeks here, but it would be open source. So that's a specific thing I'm doing where I'd love to have this community contribute.
Great. No, that's really, really awesome. Really appreciate that. Hey, Eugene, I see you on the call. You guys at Mozilla were one of the very first leaders in this whole movement. Would love to get your perspective from the Mozilla, the great work you've done there and amazing leadership you've had. Any thoughts?
Well, thank you. Thank you for calling me. I'm not with Mozilla anymore. But
you're not? Okay.
But I can attest that they're doing a great job. And actually, that's what I was thinking here about the whole concept of open talent is not as simple and intuitive as it might seem, because Mozilla actually has very, very large community around. But the problem is that the involvement of this community began stagnating. And one of the reasons of them, there are many of them, but one of the reasons is that as a product inside the company becomes more and more complicated, it takes more and more time to train anyone who comes from outside. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, cost of benefit analysis changes. So that's one factor. So I would say that many people perhaps would be reluctant to hire freelancers because they're afraid that training them will be kind of more costly and time consuming than going with internal resources. Something must be done about that. And the second point, very briefly, as someone who did kind of internal and external crowdsourcing, kind of open innovation approach, and well, Steve, you would confirm that there are things that internal crowds do better, and then there are things that external crowds do better. Mm-hmm. And it's not always clear to a novice in this field what job should be allocated to internal crowd or external. So a textbook of what freelancer would do better than internal employees would be very helpful, because that would give people understanding. Well, this is a point we have to go to freelancers. Paul did fabulous job, kind of starting doing this kind of evangelizing, but it's still not enough for very many organizations to adopt.
Yeah, early days for sure. Thanks, Eugene. Appreciate that. Let's open it up to everybody. Anybody else have something to say or want to contribute? Just jump in.
I'll go, John. I wanted to talk a little bit about my days at IBM. When I was at IBM, we were doing something called the liquid workforce. And the liquid workforce was intended to be much more than I think we eventually got it to. But there was a real problem with motivation to do it. People, almost needed a stick or something. It was really some impetus to drive it to make people adopt. And I think right now we have such a great impetus to do this. If you saw in the news last week, or maybe it was earlier this week, about New Zealand talking about their 90% economy and how they're going to shift time and people through their 90% economy across New Zealand, that's the kind of impetus or driver I think that we could use if we could get people aligned to it. So I'm wondering a little bit about the stick we need as well as the carrot. And I'd be happy to talk a little bit about that. And I also wanted to add that I'd really be up for doing 3 or 4 panels, like we were discussing, recorded, that we can then share with different companies around the world about this topic.
Yeah, great. I think that's come out a lot in some of the research we've been doing lately, is the idea of, creating more, webinars and things like that as a group, and however we can do that. Paul's doing a great job with that. And Chuck, I'd really suggest you connect with Paul for sure. And let's definitely get that going. Anybody else have anything?
You know what, John, this is Sheila. Can I say something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of your earlier call to action, I just wanted to volunteer that, like, if anybody, I would be interested in exploring the barriers to open talent. And if anybody wanted to have a sidebar conversation about that, I'd be interested in maybe producing something on the topic. Usually these efforts, like any sort of project, has some sort of deliverable. We do a lot of this type of collaboration in the pharmaceutical industry. We have thought leadership groups where a lot of people participate pro bono in order to produce content or methodology that the entire industry can use. And I think that's probably along the lines of what you were talking about in the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
If it was, then I just want to volunteer. So
good.
Let me know. I'm in.
And I've seen some other comments from Arthur and from Nicole who would like to participate as well. So that's awesome. Let's just, we'll figure out how to make sure that happens and start organically allowing those things to, and enabling those things to happen. How about anybody else? Steve, you always, Jerry, you want to jump in?
I want to go back to your kind of starting comment on the 43% who will not find a job.
Yeah.
And to add another dimension, which we've not discussed so far, which is the need for educating many of them. Higher education failed completely when it comes to long-term, kind of lifelong education, really. And the challenge is that many of the people who will not be able to go back don't have the right skills.
Right.
So the question is, to what extent the whole idea of open innovation, open talent can be linked to the educational one to upskill, to provide the needed 21st century skills and competencies for some of the people who don't have them. So that's a huge opportunity for collaboration and rethink the whole idea of education, not only the traditional approaches, but also incorporating the talent we have here.
Yeah, that's great. I spent some time a couple days ago with Tom Bander, our runs an organization called Getting Smart, which was he's one of the thought leaders in the ed tech space. And he mentioned a book from an investor. I was just looking at my notes. It's Ryan Craig, and it's called A New You. And I guess in the book, he has an organization called University Ventures and Ascent Partners. He's also, they're both private equity firms that he started. But in the book, he's suggesting that unless you get into an Ivy League school, you're better off going to get a job and then doing certifications and learning things along the way. So kind of really shifting the whole educational paradigm. So I'm going to be on a podcast with Tom in a couple of weeks, and it'll be really interesting to explore kind of what are the intersections of education and open talent for sure. But I thank you so much, Jerry. That was really great. I know, Steve, that's a huge passion of yours. You always have some great thoughts about the education side of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's part and parcel, and I'm sitting here getting emails from my daughter's universities that are basically laying out these just vastly different experiences, and the same in some of the primary and secondary. I think this is a real opportunity to really kickstart a lifelong learning initiative that folds directly into this gig economy, right? I mean, we see it over and over, and honestly, what I don't see enough of is people in the education space engaging with people in this new emerging workspace, and yet they are so tightly bound, and the success of each is dependent on the other. And so it would be really great to see, can we get, I know I know HR's got some transformation going on, I know education's got, we got to somehow pull these folks together, because it is all bound definitely in one thing, and there's so much creativity going on. I always go back to Burdick's Paro example, where he's bounded into his AI, where every task you get ends up upskilling you and ends up getting you. And so that's the most exciting thing I've seen in that space. And I think there's lots to grow on there. So just like Sheila wants to jump on the barriers, which I think is a great conversation to have, I would love there to be a conversation that really draws in some of this discussion about education and where does it fit? How can we stop thinking of education over here and work over here and combine them? Because the rate that things are changing doesn't allow that model to exist effectively anymore. We have to move to this combination thing where the learning is part and parcel of the work.
Yeah, I think
that's just me. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. I was on a call, so Jen, shared the technology and entrepreneurship, going from 5,000 to 30,000, people participating in that edX program. And I was on the phone, discussing kind of future of HBS with Kareem a couple of days ago. And he said, that's pretty interesting, but more interestingly, entrepreneurship, their kind of online class of entrepreneurship in emerging markets went from 20,000 participants last year to 475,000 this year. So certainly there's an explosion on the supply side. And Kareem's point is that a lot of folks inside HBS just aren't ready to change, right? They just don't have the tools. You can't teach the way you used to teach with a whole new format. So I think certainly we can help, and I think that would be a really good thing to connect work and education. Jerry, thanks for bringing that up. Really important. Hey,
well, to add on that.
What's that? Go ahead. Go ahead, Jerry.
I just want to provide incentive, guys, for you to move in this area. About 6 years ago, I started together with QS, which is the world leading university ranking organization, a program called Reimagine Education. It's a global competition for the most innovative pedagogical approaches in higher education. And we get typically about 1,000 applications a year from like 90 countries. And there is a big conference at the end of every year, summarizing, giving awards. Leading award is $50,000. Will be absolutely amazing if we'll get an entry that talks about the integration of open innovation in reimagining education. And how do we kind of start thinking about the on-demand talent and what are the implications to the on-demand education? Because you really have to try to link those two. So just a call for everyone who's interested in this, and you can just check the website of Reimagine Education.
Great. That sounds great, Jerry. Thanks a lot. That's a good first step. Steve, did you want to add something too?
Well, I was just going to say, you know, that resistance that all of the educational institutions have had traditionally, I think a lot of those walls are tumbling down over the last 2 months in a way that we just hadn't seen before. And so I think the opportunity is one that's right in front of us, and this is the time to kind of to pounce on it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that's right. I think, you know, to me, over the last few calls, as I reflect back, Dean, I think your example of kind of understanding the demand on AWS and then being able to help your community certify so they could get jobs is a really great example of kind of, you know, being really proactive, not only proactive, but also kind of understanding demand and then help the supply get to where they need to go. How's that going?
Yeah, it's going well. I mean, you're referring to Amazon, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, the stuff that you mentioned last week or a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, historically, you know, I came from a consulting company, Price Waterhouse, in the past, and you know, our game was to get, you know, accreditations and partnerships with firms like Amazon, you know, in order to gain confidence in our clients to sell big deals, et cetera. And so, as kind of the world of doing thing gets more chopped up, projects, whether you're a, you know, employee or a contractor, you know, it's more project-based stuff. I mean, this whole on-demand discussion is about that. And, you know, Amazon looks to find experts that do specifically things that help, you know, them sell more AWS cloud. And we're happy to help them. You know, but what's in this conversation was, and it's going well. AWS, by the way, if you don't know about it, it has something called AWS IQ, which is effectively a talent marketplace for AWS experts. So anyone who's concerned about Jeff Bezos starting to sell experts, you know, knowledge worker experts, should keep an eye on AWS IQ. But, you know, thinking through this, and this is actually partially inspired by Paul Estes, who kind of went from like big corporate guy to like crazy freelancer, which he is now. He's always been crazy, but crazy freelancer now. And, you know, I think a lot of people who may have gotten displaced from a full-time position might have to start considering, you know, becoming an independent contractor. I bet you LegalZoom's, you know, revenues creating LLCs and S Corps is increased a lot. And I think one thing platforms can do is, and MBO, this is MBO Partners' business, is help shepherd people from the world of full-time, always had a W-2 to what the heck is a 1099 and what do I need to do to put that in place. You know, so MBO's business model does that. That's cool. But then like giving people confidence that they can reskill, but then find work is kind of our job, I think, as platforms. I don't think there's any clear answer on how do we get together and share data to like build that in a way that, you know, 1 + 1 = 3 quite yet. I think most people would be open to that conversation, but certainly just offering the ability to have a plausible career that isn't involving, you know, signing up another, you know, employment agreement and getting a W-2 is one path forward here. And that's what I think about when I think about tangible things you can do match, you know, skill with demand that's actually out there. Sorry, that was a wandering diatribe there, but that's what's going on in my head.
I love it. I love it.
One of the things, John, one of the things that's been playing well, and I truly believe, I believe that W-2 employment is called captive employment. And I encourage people to use that term because it is captive. You sign an employment agreement, and if anybody's read their employment agreement, you are held captive. You're told where to sit. You're told how to work. You get reorged in a box, however they like, and that's okay. It's just called captive employment. And I wasn't willing to be captively employed. And so I find that term resonates with people because they stop and think to go, well, what does that mean? I'm captive. Well, read your employment agreement. There are people that believe that being captively held and employed is a good strategy or a safe place. And there are people that believe that being free to have their own ideas and work with who they want and how they work is a good strategy. And those are both paths. And it's just a choice. And people now are more and more making that choice to be free, whether captive. And so I encourage this group, if you're ever in a podcast or, you know, writing an article, to embrace the word captive and say, it's okay, but let's call it what it is. Let's not sugarcoat it with some HR language and all of this other stuff. There's compliance around it and all sorts of machinery to make sure that you are captive and provide value to the organization. And so it's something that I've been getting a lot of questions in people's faces, and they're liking it. So I wanted to share that with this group. I am not captive.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it really resonates with me. My wife, Emily, is one of the athletic directors at University of Colorado. And she turned to me the other day and she concluded, you know, the only objective that I had for the last 9 years is that all I had to do is show up at 8 in the morning and leave at 5. If I was there the whole day, then that was doing an awesome job, no matter what quality of work I did. And, you know, when you're in that system, it's easy to you can't see the forest for the trees. But when you're kind of all of a sudden doing remote work and doing all of your work in an hour and a half to 2 hours a day, it changes everything, right? You're like, well, why am I there 8 to 5? And why am I being held captive in this situation? So I think that's a really, really good point, Paul.
Yeah. When you're in prison, all of your meals are for free and all of your schedule is planned, right? But you still are in prison. So
that's why I trolled. That's why I posted to Jeff Weiner yesterday when he made his comment. I'm like, hey, now's an opportunity to get rid of some of the free food and redirect that money to help society, to help shareholders, and also help customers, you know?
Yeah, great point.
It's really
Anybody else?
Yeah, I think it's really changing the narrative around it. There's this collective fear in our societies about the unknown, and we've been sold safety by big corporations, right? Like it's just there's this resistance against, well, what if I don't have a job? I'm reliant on somebody else rather than being empowered individually. And it's shifting the narrative on a bigger scale against, you know, what history has developed from the industrial era. I was watching the LeaderCast talk by Sangram Vadri from Terminus, and he was talking about the sense of belongship and how there's such a need to empower individuals that there is more. So I work in the banking sector in Canada, and we are very traditional in our organizational structure. I'm a junior executive, so not right at the top, and don't have influence over everything, but there is a lot of resistance even within that structure to going to open talent market to actually, and a lot of it is just unknown. It's taking people from that point of, you know, here's how we've always done it, to here is the possibility. If I can paint that picture so clear for you as where you could be and how great it could be and how efficient you could be and how much more freedom and abundance you're going to bring into people's lives. I'm so passionate about this movement, John, so thank you for letting me join in.
No, always great to hear from you.
Yeah, I just think there's so much opportunity to help these lives who have been impacted and help these people understand what's out there and that they can be in control of what their future looks like.
That's
awesome. Statistically speaking, John, people who work independently are happier on almost every single metric. They're more satisfied with their careers. They have a better work-life balance. They make more money. Mark brought this point up about how You would imagine that people who are better at what they do choose to be independent because they have the personal confidence. I've always been fascinated with the differentiated belief between what makes someone successful versus what makes somebody not. And I think Paul is right on when it comes to this notion of captive, but the deeper issue as I see it is people don't see the possibility for themselves. And the best way to do that is to share the stories about people who have unlikely or non-traditional paths to success. The world is full of people who went to Wharton and then choose to become and put their shingle out after they yielded some experience at Price Waterhouse. But what about the person who didn't come from the same connected beginnings? I am perfectly happy to say that I have the freakish and weirdish background that got me to where I am today. And that's one of the things I'm most proud of. But I think stories of origin and stories of people who have succeeded in the independent economy, I think those are going to be the way to create a collective mythology that redefines what's possible.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea of collective mythology. Thanks, Brian. That's a really good add to the conversation. Hey, Paul, as you were talking, one of the things that I always think about is one of the people that have made this amazing transformation is Diane. Diane, you've always been inspiring to me because you so owned the whole Genius Link and were one of the founders of this whole thing. And now you're off, doing your own thing and made that transition just like Paul has too. And I'd love for you to kind of, reflect on what you see, those barriers are and work together to make it happen.
Yeah, I couldn't have made that transition without this community, without this collective, the advice, the guidance, the examples from this community, from you, John, Steve, Balaji, Paul, etc. It's just, I think that people need to see kind of their potential in our stories and our journeys. And the more that, to Paul's earlier point, the more that we can be very vocal and visible advocates for people that are trapped in the captive world, we can show them they don't need to jump off the cliff and make the dive completely from W-2 to 1099. They can have portfolio careers, right? People can begin to tune and optimize their experience by side hustles, learning hustles, or they can make the dive, and we can show them how. And we can show them, where the safe landing zones are in communities like TopTal, like Catalent, like Upwork, Topcoder. There are so many passion-based communities where people can thrive and really kind of realize their dreams and enrich their careers and their experience. We just need to get the word out, and we need to show them that there are a myriad of ways to kind of make this journey. And I think what the collective is doing, right, and showing both the demand side and the supply side, what we can accomplish together is so important. So thank you, everyone. I have been a beneficiary of your examples and your stories and your journeys. I can't thank you enough for that. And I hope my journey is helpful for some of you as well.
Very inspiring always. Thanks, Diane. That's awesome. I know we're running up against time. I so appreciate you guys, and I think this is awesome. Hey, Jerry, I'd love for you to bring some context. You're always our conversation so great at kind of connecting the bigger picture. Any thoughts after the conversation today?
Well, I thought it was fascinating. Let me kind of just quickly summarize some of the topics I heard and try to suggest a few key areas. I think bridging the silos is really key. Great example is the work that the Sheldon Adelson medical philanthropic activity is doing. They condition their philanthropic activities in the medical area on the recipient willing to share their activities, results, process with everyone else. So I think it's kind of one interesting example. Whatever we can do to try to enhance it will be great. The barriers, I think if we can link it with one of the other ideas was suggested, which is, why don't we try to share the experiences? So we can start using your platform here as a platform to try to share the experiences. What works in terms of breaking the barriers? The guideline for enterprise is fascinating, and it sounds like there are two sets of guidelines here. One for enterprises, how to leverage better open innovation, open talent. It can also be linked to if companies are concerned about the captive work and its negative aspects, what they can do to try to overcome it, like what Google is doing and some others. But the second set of guidelines is actually to people who aspire to move from the captive world to becoming more independent part of the gig economy, part of the open talent area. So I think we can really serve as a place to try to put these things together. In the latter area, in terms of helping individuals, if we can provide the stories and start providing role models for these people, I think this will be enormously valuable. And the final thought is, there is so much knowledge and experience here. Can we formalize it by doing some meta-analysis to try to come up with empirical generalizations across all these experiences? So we have a wealth of information on those calls, but if we can start developing a more systematic approach of a meta-analysis of what have we learned from this, what works, what doesn't work, and then both for guidelines to companies as well as individuals, I think this can be very powerful and with huge impact. So thanks, John, for facilitating it.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think those are really good points, and thanks for bringing those up. Sorry if we didn't get a chance to get to everybody's comments today. This is such an awesome group, and I'm loving the fact that more people are participating. So thanks to everybody for doing that. A couple of things that I heard today were just really leaning into kind of maybe some subgroups. Sheila, thanks for leaning into kind of the barriers thing. I think there's an education idea, Steve, that you brought, Steve and Jerry, you brought up, and then also kind of this, how do we create those cultural stories and some ideas around that, creating a movement with storytelling, which was another theme that I heard. So we're right at time. Thanks again, everybody. Really love you guys. So next week, I'm going to be on this ride. Hopefully I'll be able to check in, but I think I elect Steve Rader to run next week's call. Are you up for it, Steve? Okay, awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, we'll put it together. I'll make sure that I talk to everybody. But thanks again, and love you guys, and talk soon. Take care.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody. It's great.